The last time I went fishing, I had no idea the trip would turn into more of an adventure than I bargained for. It started on a calm September morning, when the first crisp edge of fall crept into the air. I set out with my old canoe and a tackle box that had seen more duct tape repairs than I cared to admit. My plan was simple: follow the river down to a bend where the water deepened, a spot that had always been good for trout. The trees along the bank were already beginning to turn gold, rust, and a few stubborn greens still clinging to summer. Their reflections shimmered on the glassy surface of the river as I pushed off, paddle dipping quietly into the cool water. For the first mile or so, everything went just as planned. I let the current do most of the work, casting my line lazily as I drifted along. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic splash of the paddle, the chatter of a kingfisher darting across the water, and the occasional plunk of my lure landing in the shallows. It was one of those mornings that makes you forget about everything else, the sort of peace that seems like it can't be disturbed. But rivers have a way of humbling you the moment you grow too comfortable. Just past a stretch of smooth water, I heard a low roar ahead. At first, I thought it was just wind in the trees, but soon enough I realized I'd misjudged the map and drifted toward a set of rapids I hadn't planned for. The current began to tug at the canoe with surprising force. I tried to angle away, but the river had me in its grip. The bow swung toward the churning white water, and my heart kicked into overdrive. What was supposed to be a quiet fishing day was about to become something else entirely. The first bump came quick. My canoe scraped hard against the submerged rock, jolting me so sharply that my rod nearly leapt out of the boat. I dug in with the paddle, trying to keep the bow straight, but the river was stronger than my arms. The water surged and spun me sideways, sending spray into the boat as I slammed through the first chute. My gear rattled, my tackle box tipped, and half the lures went clattering across the bottom. I'll admit, I muttered a few words the river probably didn't care for. Then came the second chute, steeper than the first. The nose of the canoe dipped, water curling over both sides. For a heartbeat, I thought I was going to swamp right there. Somehow, the boat popped through upright, rocking like a toy as I steadied myself. I was soaked to the skin, but still afloat. I'll never forget the sound. It wasn't just the rush of water, but the echoing thunder off the canyon walls, bouncing back in waves. The smell of wet stone filled the air, sharp and mineral-rich, mixing with the faint sweetness of fallen leaves crushed in the current. My hands were trembling, both from the cold spray and the adrenaline that had spiked through me. When I finally paddled into calmer water, the relief was almost overwhelming. My arms ached, my legs felt rubbery, and my chest heaved like I'd run a marathon. I drifted to the bank and pulled the canoe up onto a gravel bar to catch my breath. The sun had climbed higher by then, breaking through the morning mist and painting everything with a warm, golden glow. Steam rose from my wet clothes as I sat there, watching the river settle back into its quiet rhythm just downstream. The funny thing is, as shaken as I was, I couldn't help but laugh a little. I'd set out to fish, and here I was already feeling like I'd been through a battle. The trout hadn't even seen my line yet. That's when I noticed something odd, a fresh set of tracks in the damp gravel just a few yards from where I'd pulled up. Big tracks. And suddenly, I realized the rapids might not be the wildest part of this trip. The tracks were fresh, so fresh the edges were still crumbling in the damp gravel. At first glance, I thought they belonged to a large dog. But the spacing, the width of the pads, and the depth of each impression told me otherwise. Bear. A big one, judging by the size. My pulse, which had just started to calm from the rapids, spiked again. I crouched low, tracing one of the prints with my fingertips. The riverbank told a clear story. Mud scuffed where the bear had come down, prints leading straight to the water, then back up toward the tree line. Likely it had been down for a drink, maybe even fishing itself. The thought gave me a strange mix of awe and unease. I'd come out here to catch trout, but this fella had probably been fishing long before I set foot on the gravel bar. The forest around me seemed suddenly louder. The chatter of a squirrel high up in the pines. The sharp cry of a crow echoing through the canyon. Even the wind sighing through the branches seemed like a whisper of warning. I scanned the shadows, half expecting to see dark fur shifting between the trunks. Nothing stirred. Still, I couldn't shake the prickling on the back of my neck. I considered pushing off right away, putting some water between me and whatever left those tracks. But something in me, curiosity, stubbornness, maybe plain foolishness, kept me there. I set up my rod and cast the line into the calmer pool at the edge of the rapids. My lure danced in the current, sunlight glinting off the water's ripples. The river gurgled and sang, almost as though nothing was amiss. Minutes passed. A trout struck hard, and the sudden tug nearly wrenched the rod from my grip. My heart leapt as I fought it in, the silver body flashing just beneath the surface before I eased it onto the gravel. A fine catch, big enough for dinner. As I admired it, though, a rustle from the brush behind me froze my smile in place. I didn't need to turn to know. The bear was closer than I thought. I turned slowly, rod still in one hand, the trout dangling from the line. Sure enough, out of the brush lumbered a black bear, glossy coat rippling in the sunlight. It wasn't charging, just ambling with that deceptive, heavy-footed gray bears have. But it was heading in my direction, nose twitching, clearly drawn by the scent of fresh fish. Or maybe me. My heart hammered so hard I swear it echoed louder than the river. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew better. Running from a bear is about the fastest way to guarantee you'll see what a bear can really do. So, I set the rod down slowly, hands raised a little, trying to look calm even as my knees felt like they might buckle. The bear stopped about 20 yards away, head low, eyes locked on me. I remembered something an old woodsman once told me. Talk to a bear like you're greeting a neighbor across the fence. Calm, steady, no sudden moves. So that's what I did. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I went. Easy there, fella. Just passing through. Plenty of fish in the river, don't mind me. It huffed, pawed the gravel, and swayed its head side to side. My fingers itched to reach for the paddle and push off into the water, but the canoe sat just behind me, and I wasn't sure I could make it without startling him. The air between us felt thick, heavy with a wild tension that made every second stretch longer than it had any right to. Then, as if deciding I wasn't worth the trouble, the bear shifted its weight and turned toward the shallows. It splashed into the river, muzzle dipping in and out as it waited. I stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe, while it snatched at something beneath the water. A moment later, it emerged with a fat fish wriggling in its jaws. I couldn't help it. I laughed, a short, nervous bark of relief. The bear didn't so much as glance at me. It lumbered back into the trees, prize clamped tight, vanishing into the forest with only the crash of branches to mark its passing. Only then did I realize how tightly I'd been gripping the trout still dangling from my line. My knuckles were white, and my legs shook as though I'd just come off another set of rapids. I had survived both, somehow, in the span of less than an hour. The river was calm again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the wilderness had just reminded me who was truly in charge out here. I sat on that gravel bar for a long while after the bear disappeared, just listening to the steady rush of the river and letting my heart slow back down. The trout I'd caught flopped weakly, reminding me that dinner was still in my hands if I wanted it. I cleaned the fish right there, rinsing it in the cold current, all the while keeping one eye on the tree line. Every snapped twig or rustle of leaves made me tense, though nothing else came through. By late afternoon, the sun had dropped lower and the air carried that cool bite that told me night was coming fast. I pushed off again, letting the canoe drift downstream until I found a sandy bank tucked beneath a stand of pines. It was as good a camp as any, soft ground, plenty of wood nearby, and a view of the river's bend where the water shimmered bronze under the sinking sun. I built a small fire, its smoke curling into the crisp evening air, and cooked the trout over the coals. The skin crackled, the meat flaked apart, and after the day I'd had, it tasted better than any feast. As darkness crept in, the forest came alive in its own way. Crickets tuned up their chorus, an owl hooted from somewhere up the slope, and the river's murmur became the lullaby of the night. I lay back against my pack, staring at the stars prickling the sky. They always seem brighter out in the wilderness, as though the whole universe leans a little closer when you're far from towns and roads. I thought about the rapids, about that bear, about how quickly a calm fishing trip had turned into something else entirely. It struck me then, out here, you're never really in control, not in the way we like to think. The river runs its course, the animals follow their paths, and all you can do is move with it, respect it, and accept your place in the larger story. When the fire burned low and the chill deepened, I crawled into my bedroll, the smell of pine needles sharp in my nose. I drifted to sleep with the embers glowing faintly beside me, feeling both small and strangely at peace. The wilderness had tested me, shaken me, even frightened me, but it had also fed me, sheltered me, and reminded me how alive a man can feel when he's humbled by it. That was my last fishing trip. Not the quiet, lazy day I'd set out for, but one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.